He tried to take my niece and her inheritance with a fake evaluation. Then my sister's voice from a toy and a hidden codicil exposed him in court. Grief rearranges a home the way movers do when you're not there to supervise. Everything technically still present, nothing where it belongs. After my sister Hannah's funeral, the house on Birch Lane had that displaced feeling. Framed photos tilted by unfamiliar hands. Casserole dishes sweating on the counter like unattended guests. A pink backpack leaning against the banister as if its owner would thunder downstairs any second. She didn't. Lily, 8 years old, hair in a crooked braid Hannah never would have allowed, had folded herself into the corner of the couch with the solemn concentration of a child trying not to become the center of the room. I moved through the house slowly, not touching much, mapping absence. The refrigerator held her sticky notes in the cheerful loops I could recognize by scent alone. Field trip Friday, library books due, call dentist. On the dining table, the practical chaos of an interrupted week, a half-finished science project, a sealed envelope from the school counselor, a bill from the pediatrician Hannah always paid early. The ordinary scale of her life made the finality louder. Death had come like a memo. The paperwork, as paperwork does, had arrived right on time. Mark Ellison, Hannah's husband for 3 years and Lily's legal stepfather for less, took the lead with a confidence that seemed to grow every hour. He had the posture of a man auditioning for the role of responsible adult. Hands clasped, voice measured, eyes patient in the way that asks you to compliment their patience. He talked about routines and logistics, about how children need stability, about how courts prefer continuity. He did not say inheritance, not once, which told me he understood the etiquette even if he didn't respect the spirit. Hannah's life insurance, small, but not nothing, had already become a shadow that followed him from room to room. That evening, when the house emptied of sympathies and the dishwasher hummed its small commitment to normal, I found Lily in Hannah's bedroom, organizing hair clips by color on the quilt, like she could bring order to the day by taming something manageable. I didn't speak. She didn't move. The room carried Hannah's perfume in the same way a seashell carries the sea, faded but undeniable. On the dresser, a ceramic keepsake box shaped like a star rested where Hannah always dropped her rings at night. Its lid was slightly askew. I lifted it and found what I wasn't looking for, a small, scuffed plush rabbit with a stitched heart on one ear. I knew it as well as the house did. Button. Lily had named it when she was 2, because words arrive out of order when you're small and charming. The rabbit's fur had gone thin at the seams from years of being asked to do jobs it was never designed for. In the center of the stitched heart, almost invisible, a plastic dot waited under felt. I pressed it. The rabbit stayed silent. I pressed again. A faint red blink answered from the seam, low battery. Not a simple squeaker. A recorder. Hannah worked double shifts during residency and still managed to layer backups into her daughter's life. Spare inhaler in the glove box. Spare house key in the clay pot by the porch. Spare bedtime in the car for nights the day refused to quit. She would have recorded a song, a story, some silly rhyme to fold the dark into something smaller. I wanted that version of the discovery. I wanted something gentle. Instead, Button's red light blinked once more and died. The house exhaled, and the silence that followed didn't feel like rest. It felt like something bracing itself. The next morning parsed itself into tasks because tasks are the only shape grief agrees to. Mark scheduled a meeting with a family attorney he knew. I skimmed the preliminary documents the funeral director had slid across a desk still sticky from coffee. I called Hannah's HR to confirm the policy details she had mentioned the last time we discussed practicalities disguised as hypotheticals. On the kitchen island, the mail made its daily pilgrimage. In the stack, an envelope from a clinic across town addressed to me. Care of Hannah's house, using my full name the way official. Letters due when they intend to be taken. Seriously, the letter said I had a history of emotional instability that raised concerns about my fitness to serve in any custodial capacity. It said the clinic had evaluated me last month. It said things that slotted neatly into the kind of narrative you lean on when you want guardianship to look like charity. I haven't been a patient there. I haven't been evaluated anywhere in years. The signature belonged to a doctor whose name I recognized from a billboard on the freeway. Smiling, trust me teeth. A palm pressed to a family's shoulder like reassurance is a skill you can laminate. I read it 3 times. On the third, I noticed the kind of detail paperwork tries to hide from people who are new to this. The creation timestamp in the PDF header sat 4 minutes before the email's send time. The generator string matched a consumer scanner, not a clinic's EMR. The line breaks were wrong for the template. The watermark seal wore a halo that fogged at the edges, like a sticker pressed to glass and peeled back too often. Someone had prepared for this week months ago, the way some people stock basements for storms. Hannah's body was barely cold, and I was already a problem to be solved with documents. In the late afternoon, Mark staged normal. He cooked spaghetti, oversalted. He asked Lily about spelling words with the soft focus of a man performing competence for a committee. He explained, in that same patient voice, that lawyers like to see children in familiar spaces with familiar routines, and that he'd make sure she got to soccer on Saturdays. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask me to leave. He didn't say anything about Hannah's will because the will had not yet been located, which meant the best plan for a certain kind of person is to behave as if it favors them. After dinner, Lily hid under the table and whispered something to Button that wasn't a word so much as a sound children make when they are trying not to cry. I found a screwdriver and pried open the rabbit's battery door in the quiet of Hannah's closet while the house tried on night. A single AAA rattled like a reluctant confession. I replaced it with one from the TV remote and pressed the heart again, counting under my breath as if patience could summon the past. The red light blinked, steadier this time. Static. A click. A breath. Hannah's. Then her voice, lower than usual, like she'd moved closer to the mic to make the machine keep a secret. If you're listening, she said, it means I didn't get to say this where it would have counted most. My own breath felt loud in the room. Outside the window, a porch light from the next house threw a soft rectangle onto Hannah's quilt. I'm leaving a note with my attorney about Lily. The recording continued. If anyone argues, look where she hides treasures. The blue music box. Static again. A muffled scrape, as if the recorder had brushed fabric while she repositioned Button's ear. Then 5 quiet words that made the room smaller, sharper, necessary. Trust your eyes, not theirs. The recording clicked off. The rabbit watched me with its stitched expression that had no business holding the weight it now carried. In the hallway. Mark's voice moved up the stairs, the cadence of a man announcing bedtime like a verdict. The cadence of someone who believed the house had already decided who belonged in which room. I set Button gently back in the ceramic star and closed the lid. The blue music box sat 3 feet away on Hannah's dresser. I had never seen it open. I reached for it, with hands that didn't feel like mine, just as the hallway light snapped on, bright and deliberate. The way lights are when they intend to catch you in the act. The blue music box was small enough to vanish in a drawer and heavy enough to matter. Its lacquered lid held a field of tiny stars. The hinge squeaked the way hinges do when they've guarded secrets for too long. When I lifted it, the room accepted the sound like an admission. Inside lay the ordinary theater of keepsakes, 2 bobby pins, a hospital bracelet with Hannah's maiden name, the flat oval of a riverstone Lily had pocketed on a picnic, and beneath them, a folded stack that did not belong to nostalgia. On top, a photocopy bore a watermark from Kaufman and Rhodes, LLP, and the subject line the law uses when it intends to be taken seriously, letter of intent re, guardianship preference. The date lived 4 months behind us, far enough to prove Hannah hadn't written it in a panic. She identified Lily by full name and birth date, articulated her reasoning in clear, clinical language that still found space to sound like a mother, and named me as the person she preferred to assume care if she could not. It was not a will. It was a light aimed at the exact corner the day had turned us into, beneath. The letter sat a thin packet titled Temporary Care. Instructions, med dosage and school contacts, and the kind of schedules you only notice when someone else's life needs to continue without them. Tucked inside, a USB drive lay taped to a printed index, scans of Lily's medical power of attorney, school pickup permissions where my name appeared more often than Mark's, and an email chain between Hannah and a paralegal about notarizing a formal guardian nomination to attach to her will when they updated it at year's end. She hadn't finished the last step. She had done enough of the others to draw a map. The rabbit, Button, sat on the dresser like a small accomplice. I pressed the heart again, once, To hear Hannah say the sentence that had already begun to govern my day. Trust your eyes, not theirs. Then I turned to the clinic letter that had arrived like a curse that knew my address. The fonts did not match across pages. The seal's edges feathered in a way ink never does. The doctor's electronic signature image hash, something most people never learn to check, was identical to a press release hosted on the clinic's website. The PDF's author string listed a consumer scanner, and the creation time predated the email by 4 minutes. The story the letter tried to tell about me had been built on a desk that did not belong to medicine. Across the hall, the house had resumed its pantomime of normal. The dishwasher thudded to the end of a cycle. A neighbor's SUV idled at a curb. I spread the evidence on Hannah's quilt in neat rows that made the bed look like a staging area. Letter of intent. Temporary care instructions, USB, clinic forgery. Then photographed everything with timestamps visible. I pulled the USB files onto my laptop and mirrored them to a cloud folder. I paid for more conscientiously than most subscriptions, because I had learned that memory not backed up is just another way of trusting luck. The lid of the music box had been lined with felt. The felt had been lifted and reattached at least once. A finger under the seam found a lip of wood where there should have been glue. A small compartment accepted a fingernail and opened to reveal a microSD card in a plastic sleeve, the kind of redundancy Hannah used when she wanted to be sure one plan failing would not fail the person who needed it. I slid it into an adapter and watched a directory populate. Photos, scans, voice. The last folder held 3 files with dates stamped like stepping stones toward the week we were living. I didn't press play. Not yet. The day had already asked me to carry more voices than I was certain I could stand. Instead, I built a list with the discipline I use when emotion wants to steal precision. Call attorney, someone who did not know Mark. Call child welfare hotline to self-report the situation and lodge Hannah's preferences. Schedule consult with the firm named in the letter to confirm their custody protocol. I added verified doctor status for the signer of the instability letter and pull board of health license records. Grief is a creature of weather. Guardianship is an animal of calendars. I would serve the second. The first would ride in the back seat and complain when the road got roughed up by late afternoon. Emails had turned into appointments. Claire Benton, a family lawyer with a reputation for clean files and a tolerance for complicated truths, agreed to see me at 9 the next morning. A social worker from the hotline called back within an hour, gentle but efficient, asking for copies of Hannah's letter, the temporary instruction packet, and any evidence of routine I could show that put Lily's best interest on paper. The words best interest hit with the weight of something that can be paraded or protected. I chose the latter and sent what I had. Paper moved. It moved faster from elsewhere. At dusk, a knock at the door turned the hallway into a tunnel. A process server stood on the porch with a packet held in a way that made refusal pointless. Ex parte petition for temporary guardianship sat on top with Mark Ellison named as petitioner and several pages of declarations that said the kinds of things declarations say when they plan to get what they came for before anyone else can stand. The hearing had been calendared for 8:30 a.m., a half hour before my appointment with Claire, the kind of timing that isn't coincidence so much as a tactic. Win the morning and let the afternoon explain itself to a judge already persuaded by the first draft that I read fast and found the familiar fingerprints of the clinic letter tucked into exhibits like a crowbar. The petition leaned on continuity and household and soccer practice and the euphemisms people employ when they mean money but are not allowed to say it at a podium. It did not acknowledge Hannah's preferences because acknowledging them would require admitting they existed. I placed the packet beside the evidence on the quilt and felt the shape of the fight settle into focus. Not a debate about love, a contest about paper, not a question of who could perform stability in a kitchen. At 7 p.m., a question of who had a record at 9 a.m. that would still look like truth at. Before I slept, if what I did counts as sleep, I opened the voice folder on the microSD and listened to the first recording. Hannah's voice lived at the perfect distance from the mic, calm and practical and threaded with the kind of care that folds strength around fear without announcing it. If this is needed, she said, it's because someone is arguing in a way that makes love sound like ownership. The court will want process. Give them mine. I let the file end. I did not press the next one. I wrote give them mine on a sticky note and put it on the back of my phone. At 7:14 a.m., My phone vibrated with a calendar alert that was not mine. Mark had shared a custodial schedule invite with a single line in the description, "We should talk after court." He had already stepped into a future that assumed the present would comply. I set the phone face down. The morning took on the hard edges of a sprint, copy shop lights, the smell of toner, IDs aligned against glass, duplicates made in triplicate because bad outcomes love missing pages. I tucked Hannah's letter and the USB index into a clear sleeve, packed button into a grocery bag like contraband joy, and slid the music box into a tote where the lid would not be crushed by sudden stops. T822. I stepped into a courtroom that always looks smaller than television teaches you to expect. The clerk took my exhibits with the impersonal care of someone who has learned not to absorb the stories attached to paper. The judge's calendar clicked through names like a metronome. Mark sat 2 rows up, posture flawless, tie the color of a compromise. He did not turn at him why name was called. The petition's caption glowed from a screen. The judge lifted the first page. My binder waited on the table, 37 tabs like vertebrae. Patient as a spine. The hearing began before my attorney could arrive. And the USB file Hannah had labeled voice under row 2 sat on a micro SD in my pocket. A sentence I had not yet heard pressed flat against fabric. A future argument with my sister's breath inside it. Ready to make the room listen. Emergency calendars move like conveyor belts. Names advancing whether you're ready or not. The courtroom felt smaller than the air required. Fluorescent light flattening color until everyone looked equally certain. My file number blinked on the screen, and the petition sat in front of the judge like a verdict waiting for ink. Continuity was the gravity in the room. Temporary guardianship to the stepfather was the orbit it preferred. Mark's posture made sense inside that gravity. Mine did not. I placed Hannah's blue music box on the evidence card, as if weight could argue. Paper speaks first in court. I handed up Hannah's letter of intent, the temporary care instructions, and a printed index of the USB contents. The clerk slid each under the lens. The judge's eyes moved with the economy of someone correcting a transcript. Exhibit tags snugged onto plastic sleeves with a quiet snap that felt like progress. Then the counterfeit appeared, the clinic letter dressed in authority it had not earned. I watched the cursor on the screen hover over its header while I laid out what clinic metadata never intends to confess. Consumer scanner strings. Mismatched fonts. A signature image that matched a press release pixel for pixel. The judge's pen paused. A small mercy shaped like ink. Time in emergency court is measured in what you can prove before the minute hand clears its next mark. I had more to give. School forms with my name in the pickup list. Medical authorizations that recognized me as a decision-maker. Photographs of color-coded routines in Hannah's handwriting. Best interest is a phrase that fits on a banner and disappears in a binder. I needed it to look like a calendar, a lunchbox, an inhaler placed where a child's hand could find it. The room changed temperature by half a degree. Not enough to thaw anything. Enough to suggest a thermostat existed. The door at the back opened with the authority of heels that know where they're going. Claire Benton slid into the well with a motion-stamped motion to continue/motion for temporary joint custody, the kind of pleading that buys space when speed has been weaponized. She placed it with a precision that told the judge she did not need permission to be relevant. In 3 lean pages, she gave the court a way to be cautious without being cruel. Preserve Lily's daily life. Order a brief investigation. Keep both roofs available until facts finish walking in. Emergency hearings prefer clarity to courage, but sometimes clarity is courage. The judge asked for copies. The clerk obliged. A limited continuance took shape in the language that keeps custody from turning into prize-taking. Joint temporary custody, pending verification. No relocations, school unchanged, medical decisions by consensus or court. The calendar opened a space 3 days wide. It would be a narrow bridge. It would hold if I didn't look down. I felt the pocket where the micro SD sat, warmer now from the heat of decisions. Voice_02 waited inside that sliver of plastic, Hannah's breath engineered into evidence. I had avoided it the night before because some sentences change the day they enter. Now the day had already changed without it. The judge noted that testamentary preferences are persuasive but not dispositive. I knew what that meant in practice. A mother's voice would not win alone. It would, however, make the room listen differently. The clerk wheeled the cart closer. The small courtroom speaker crackled with the brittle optimism of government sound. I cued the file with fingers steadier than they felt. In the gallery, I sensed the collective lean one notch forward, the human posture of curiosity and consequence. The second file carried a name without romance, voice_02.wave. The waveforms loaded across the screen like a coastline about to greet weather. When the first breath came through the speaker, the room changed shape. It was not grief, not yet. It was the geometry of intention stepping over paperwork that Hannah's voice began to speak, and every page on every desk forgot it had edges. The audio didn't ask for sympathy. It delivered instructions. Hannah identified Lily by name and birth date, stated her preference for me as guardian, and laid out concrete reasons the court could measure: my role in daily routines, medical appointments attended, school contacts who recognized me as the consistent adult. She noted, without ornament, that her marriage had been turbulent around money, that policy beneficiaries were in flux, and that any sudden custodial push after her death should be examined alongside financial movements. She referenced documents cached in the blue box, a paralegal's email thread about a formal guardian nomination she hadn't lived to sign, and a list of passwords stored with her attorney to verify what couldn't be trusted on paper at home. The room adjusted around the sound of her certainty. The judge's posture shifted from default continuity to cautious verification. The clerk flagged the file for the record. The social worker in the second row began a list. Best interests stopped being a slogan and became a checklist: school stability, medical continuity, safe housing, meaningful bonds. The forged clinic letter, now paired with its metadata, lost its gloss. The 4-minute creation gap and the consumer scanner tag read like footprints through wet cement. On the bench, intention met process, and process blinked first. Claire used the opening like she'd trained for it. Request a narrow continuance. Joint temporary custody to preserve Lily's week. Orders for immediate home assessments, school and pediatrician confirmations, and production of any financial or beneficiary changes executed in the last 6 months. The judge granted the bridge we needed: 72 hours of joint temporary custody, school unchanged, no relocations, medical choices by consensus or court, and assigned a rapid response investigator to both homes. Paper would be tested against refrigerators, backpacks, medication logs, and the quiet testimonies of teachers. Outside the courtroom, the day didn't soften. It hardened into tasks. Claire set timelines like tense stakes. Deliver notarized copies of Hannah's letter and the USB index to the investigator by evening. Collect written statements from the pediatrician and school counselor. Authenticate the paralegal's emails with headers intact. And subpoena the clinic for records that would prove the evaluation never happened. She also filed for a preservation order on financial accounts tied to the life insurance and any trust drafts referenced in Hannah's correspondence. By late afternoon, the first visit landed at Hannah's house. The investigator walked past Lily's backpack with the science project sheet tucked in front, the inhaler stationed in its cup by the door, the after-school snack list and Hannah's handwriting still magnet to the fridge. Routine, the kind that keeps children upright, was visible everywhere. The report would later note age-appropriate structure, prepared medications, and a child who reached for me without instruction when asked who packed her lunch, the same hour. The clinic responded to Claire's subpoena with a flat negative: no patient file under my name, no evaluation logged, and a form letter explaining signature security that inadvertently confirmed the image on the evaluation was a press material asset. The counterfeit wasn't just suspicious. It was exposed. Evening brought a different sort of proof. Lily, unprompted, retrieved button from the ceramic star and placed it in the investigator's hands, an 8-year-old's version of chain of custody. The recording was logged. The blue box documents were scanned in situ. The microSD was mirrored to an evidence drive, file hashes noted. Paper that had once tried to move in shadows stood under fluorescent light, without excuses. A S-night pressed in. One more detail surfaced with the weight of a hook: an alert from the insurer, forwarded by Hannah's HR, indicating a pending beneficiary change file opened 2 weeks before her death, left incomplete, and accessed again 48 hours after the funeral from a device registered to Mark's email. The system had stamped both attempts with IP addresses. The carrier would gladly explain to a judge that I stood in the doorway of Hannah's room after Lily fell asleep. The blue box closed, the rabbit set to one side like a sentinel at rest. The house held its breath in that way homes do between storms. There was one more file on the micro SD, voice_03, timestamped the week Hannah drafted the letter of intent. I hadn't played it. The investigator would, with witnesses and a form that verified the chain. Still, the weight of it pressed against the lining of my jacket like a heartbeat. If the second file moved to court, the third felt like a key meant for a specific lock we hadn't found, yet 72 hours isn't a lifetime. It's a ledge, but ledges hold if you place your feet where the stone still keeps its shape. The next morning would bring a visit to Mark's house, a school interview, and whatever voice_03 had been waiting to say. The investigator reached Mark's townhouse before noon. Clipboard ready, camera holstered in the polite way that says documentation will be a courtesy until it has to be an argument. The place wore the crisp geometry of a real estate listing. Soaps aligned by height, pillows squared to 90 degrees, a fruit bowl populated by wax. The report would later call it tidy and underinhabited, a phrase that reads like a compliment and lands like a question. Lily's presence existed in curated fragments, a framed school photo, a stack of coloring books without a single page torn out, a toothbrush still sealed in its plastic as if dental hygiene were something a child displays rather than uses. Routine leaves tracks. None of them felt walked. The pantry held snack bars Lily never chose. The fridge listed a weekly schedule in handwriting too careful to be lived in, a calendar with soccer and reading time written like a grant application. The investigator checked for medication placement and found an empty cup where an inhaler should have been. A closet swallowed a brand new nebulizer still in its shipping sleeve. The Wi-Fi name carried Mark's startup acronym. The guest network had been renamed to something that sounded like a pitch deck. Stability had been staged like a product launch. The school's response arrived while the townhouse performed its competence. The registrar printed the emergency contact sheet with the efficiency of a system that knows its job. Hannah at the top, then me, then Hannah's neighbor who kept spare Band-Aids in her purse and stories in her pocket. Mark's name lagged lower, added months after the marriage, rarely used. The counselor wrote a brief note in the margin about pickups. The person who routinely signed the log was me, the pen strokes varying with coffee intake and weather. The attendance system corroborated the choreography, my car timestamps, my signature on field trip waivers, my email trails arranging dentist appointments that happened on Tuesdays because Tuesdays were gentle, back at Hannah's. The blue music box settled into its role as neutral witness. The microSD mirrored cleanly into evidence storage, cryptographic hashes anchoring the bytes so that time could not blur them. The third file, voice_03, waited on a table under fluorescent light while the chain of custody form acquired signatures. I stood at the edge of the room with hands in pockets to keep from trying to hurry a process that only respects precision. If the second file had introduced Hannah's preference, the third felt like a fuse coiled beside the decisions we would have to make. When it played, the voice arrived with that same measured calm, a sound engineered to keep panic from mistaking itself for urgency. She described a folder labeled with a word only we would recognize because we carved it into summer as a joke, starboard, a nod to the crooked shelf in our childhood room where we stacked library books. She said the folder lived inside the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, beneath the quilt Lily had made in art class. Under a false bottom, she had fitted herself with a scrap of balsa and determination. She said the folder contained a signed, notarized guardian nomination from a month earlier than the letter of intent. The appointment delayed by office sickness and schedule collisions and the ordinary frictions that build just before tragedy insists on its calendar. The room did what rooms do when air changes shape. The investigator marked the time. The social worker steadied the edge of the table with a thumb that looked more like reverence than balance. I watched the chest, cedar grain holding light in long, honest lines, and forced myself to remember that what opens more kindly to patience than to adrenaline. Down the block, Mark's townhouse submitted a different kind of evidence. A banker's envelope sat half-tucked in a desk drawer, flap torn in a hurry, letterhead from an investment firm that enjoyed italicizing confidence. The timing stamped in the corner aligned with an access to the insurer's beneficiary portal, 2 weeks before the funeral. Then again 48 hours after, a tidy bracket that accounts like to make when they intend to be persuasive. The investigator photographed the envelope in situ. The firm's customer service had already answered a subpoena with the kind of corporate caution that cannot stop math from showing its work that by evening. The administration of proof had acquired momentum. The pediatrician emailed a letter that made routine feel like a test Lily had been passing for years, dosages tracked, refills on time, follow-ups attended by the same 2 adults every visit. One of them gone now, one of them standing in the doorway breathing carefully through the day. The clinic, exposed by its own emptiness, sent the absence that mattered. No appointment, no chart, no evaluation. No doctor's signature that could survive comparison to any signature not scraped from a marketing PDF. The counterfeit was no longer a suspicion. It was a hole printed to look like paper. At dusk, Lily fell asleep with button under one arm, and her braid unraveling the way strands do when the day has been longer than a child should be asked to carry. The house exhaled that specific quiet, post-storm, pre-verdict, where lamps look taller and hallways feel like agreements. The cedar chest waited at the foot of the bed with a seam that would yield to a fingernail if we let it. I stood there longer than the hinge required, making a compact with the moment. If the folder existed, it would redraw the map. If it didn't, we would walk the bridge the judge gave us with the same care, 1 foot before the other, eyes on the line where facts become orders. The investigator lifted the quilt. The cedar smell rose like a memory that had remembered its job. The false bottom gave under pressure with the soft obedience of wood that knows it was meant to move. The folder appeared, navy as a midnight door. The tab read starboard in Hannah's cramped print. The first page bore a notary seal, so clean it needed no light to argue. The signature below, it was Hannah's. Unmistakable as a fingerprint, the nomination named me, and outside, in a car idling 1 house down, a phone screen lit the inside of a windshield with the color of impatience. A small globe balanced on the edge between strategy and mistake. The Guardian nomination didn't argue. It occupied space. Ink curved where Hannah's hand always curved. The notary seal bit cleanly into the page, and the commission number sat where commissions sit when a journal can back them up. The investigator photographed the document in place, the cedar grain framed like a witness, and then slid it into a sleeve that crackled with the promise of chain of custody. My hands stayed useless at my sides until the small administrative choreography finished, because reverence moves slowly when it has been starved. Proof needs momentum. Claire filed an emergency ex parte motion before midnight. The nomination attached, the micro-SD transcript indexed. The clinic's non-record certified, the pediatrician's letter pinned where courts like to see routine live. A process server sprinted through the dark the way only process servers and guilt do. The clerk time-stamped the motion into tomorrow with a minute to spare, and the docket blinked us onto the morning calendar as if fate had found a cancellation. Notaries are the quietest kind of truth we have. At opening bell, Charlotte Reeves, the name stamped beneath the seal, produced her journal without ceremony. The line for Hannah's appearance belonged to last month, flanked by 2 neighbors renewing deeds and a signature that looked like it borrowed the pen's resolve. ID numbers matched the photocopies in Charlotte's file. The witness names sat in a row with addresses that could be knocked on by noon. The entry didn't just exist. It fit the room it claimed to come from. Meanwhile, the insurer's security team confirmed what metadata had suggested. The beneficiary portal had been touched twice, once 2 weeks before the funeral, once 48 hours after. Both logins came from the same device fingerprint, Mark's laptop when he wasn't careful enough to disguise it, and the same home IP he paid for under a bundle that liked to put its name on bills in bold. The carrier's affidavit walked the court through timestamps and IP blocks and ended with the kind of sentence that makes motions heavier. Access inconsistent with authorized changes. Attempted, incomplete, flagged up by afternoon. The school faxed their log of custody communications with the thudding practicality of a system that refuses to be poetic. My name appeared every 3rd line. Mark's name appeared when weekends demanded it. The counselor added a note about Lily's effect after drop-off and the way she reached for me without looking. The sort of detail that sounds small until you have to explain love to a stranger with a robe and a pen. All of it moved toward the hearing like weather rolling downhill. And then the air shifted in a way paperwork can't predict. Mark's townhouse camera, one of those glossy, subscription-fed eyes, pinged the investigator's dashboard at 4:38 p.m. with footage of a trunk swallowing a suitcase and a file box marked household. Rideshare records attached themselves to the same hour. A driver queued for a trip to the airport that had no ticket waiting on any airline's manifest. A neighbor's doorbell camera contributed a sliver of video where urgency looked a lot like indecision at the curb. Panic, when it is dressed as logistics, still shows its seams. Claire moved faster than I knew people could without running. She filed for an immediate stay on relocation, a reinforcement of the temporary order that already forbade changes to school and housing while facts finished arriving. The judge signed from chambers with the small, irritated elegance of someone who prefers calendars to episodes. The sheriff's office received the order while the rideshare car's icon inched toward the freeway on a map that looked suddenly too bright. Back at Hannah's, the house learned to breathe around anticipation. The blue music box sat closed on the dresser, the rabbit tucked beneath Lily's arm as dusk found her asleep the way dusk finds tired children. I stood in the doorway and counted the sounds that meant we were still in ordinary time. Refrigerator motor, upstairs vent with its single nail pop, the threadbare whir of the bathroom fan that refuses to retire. The chain of custody forms dried their ink on the table. The nomination seal had imprinted faintly through to the next page, a ghost circle that looked like resolve. My phone vibrated with the investigator's note at 5:12 p.m. The rideshare had turned around. The trunk reopened. The box labeled household returned to a hallway I didn't live in. The driver left a rating that said only canceled at door. Panic had rehearsed departure and settled for pacing. The night placed its weight on the house evenly, as if to test whether the joists were equal to the day that would arrive carrying orders. I set tomorrow's suit on the chair and smoothed a collar I could not feel through my hands. In my jacket pocket, the microSD's adapter pressed a small rectangle into the lining, the shape of a voice I had not yet heard that I lay down without sleeping. The way people do when they are rehearsing explanations to a bench that likes verbs and dates more than adjectives. At 2:17 a.m., an email from Claire cut through the dark with the brightness only strategy can produce. The judge had slotted us at 9 o'clock sharp, first on the calendar, with a line about pending verified notarial evidence. The subject line put a verb where fear likes to sit, advance to in the thin hour before morning. I watched the navy tint creep into the window. The house did what houses do when you ask them to hold more than they should. They held anyway. I tried to bargain with sleep. Sleep refused to negotiate. Dawn arrived without asking permission. When the clock found 8:59, the courtroom felt less like a conveyor belt and more like a room calibrated for thresholds. Our exhibit cart rolled to its line. The nomination seal watched the bench from under plastic. The notary journal sat on the rail with the confidence of ink that remembered where it was written. Timestamps stacked like bricks. Mark took his seat 2 rows up, shoulders squared, jaw set into a geometry built for photographs. The rideshare app's residue still clung to his timeline like perfume. The clerk lifted the file with our case number. Some hearings begin with argument. This one began with a page, Hannah's page, placed on a wood surface designed to make sound travel, and somewhere inside my jacket. Voice_03 waited for a moment I had not yet decided to give it. Courtrooms have their own weather. This one felt like high pressure, clear air, hard edges, nothing drifting. The Guardian nomination lay under plastic on the evidence card. The notary journal opened to Hannah's entry like a compass set to true north. The judge moved through the file with the economy of someone who knows how to separate drama from record. My exhibit stacked into a shape that felt less like defense and more like architecture. Letter of intent. Temporary care instructions, pediatrician letter, school logs. The clinic's certified absence, the insurer's affidavit with IPs that didn't flinch under light. Orders arrive in sentences that pretend to be small. Joint temporary custody became temporary physical custody to me, school unchanged, medical continuity preserved, no relocations, supervised access for Mark pending completion of home and financial reviews. The bench set deadlines that felt like door frames. Bank statements from the last 6 months, beneficiary access logs, a complete accounting of any transfers touching the policy or Lily's accounts. The room exhaled, but only by an inch. Morning had been won by ink, not relief. Outside, The courthouse steps held the kind of sunlight that makes paper look heavier. Claire's plan unspooled with the neat ruthlessness of good process. The notary, Charlotte Reeves, filed her certified copy. The witnesses from the journal confirmed dates without wobble. The insurer queued an internal hold that would notify us if any login tried to move money without a court's hand on its shoulder. The investigator scheduled a second sweep of Mark's townhouse, this time with a nose for documents that call themselves household to hide what they do for a living. By noon, a new vector appeared from a place no one had thought to check. Hannah's bank called Claire's office with a flag triggered by her estate profile, a safe deposit box assigned to her name, and a successor access card with mine already notarized months ago. The bank's manager spoke in the cautious cadence of people who prefer vaults to phones. But the meaning was simple. If there was a folder Hannah didn't trust to live at home, it lived behind steel and protocol. The vault room smelled like paper that had learned patience. The box slid from its sleeve with a seriousness that made my hands slow down. Inside, beneath a layer of ordinary, old passports, a birth certificate, the first-grade photo with Lily's missing front teeth, sat an envelope sealed in blue wax. The flap bore Hannah's initials. The label carried 5 words that made my heart change tempo. Open only if contested. Estate. The contents were the sort of thing strategy can't fake. A codicil dated 2 months before she died, naming me as trustee for Lily's share, barring distributions that bypassed her direct needs, and placing a no-contest clause on any action that attempted to reroute funds through a new beneficiary. A letter to any court accompanied it, written in Hannah's clear, unromantic hand, explaining why trust and guardianship should align and warning, gently but firmly, that sudden administrative initiatives after her death should be read in light of motive. Afternoon moved like wet ink drying. The bank notarized a chain of custody statement for the codicil. The clerk added us to the judge's add-on calendar. Claire filed a motion to fold the estate documents into the guardianship case so that money and care would stop pretending to be strangers. The carrier's portal logs, pulled and printed, landed on the table like footprints that had finally learned they couldn't wipe themselves away. Back at Hannah's, the house wore the quieter quiet of a place that has stopped bracing. Lily did homework on the rug, pencil making the soft scratch that sounds like future. I set the blue music box on the dresser and let the cedar chest keep its secrets fulfilled. There was one voice left on the microSD, voice_03, the file I had carried like a match in a pocket. The chain of custody mirror was complete. The investigator had logged hashes. The evidence procedures had been observed. Whatever it contained would now belong to the record, not to my private ache. When it played, it did not tell a story. It executed a plan. Hannah stated the bank branch, the box number, the contents by title, and the codicil's date. She described the no-contest clause in plain terms and tied it explicitly to guardianship. Custody and money were not to be split into separate arenas where leverage could be manufactured. She listed the paralegal by name, the notary who had watched her sign, and the 2 neighbors who were present because they were free on Thursdays and believed in paperwork. Then she ended with a sentence that was less love letter than instruction manual. If anyone frames your steadiness as instability, show them this, and do not apologize for being prepared. Evening brought the kind of movement that leaves tracks. Mark's financial production arrived with gaps big enough to name, transfers hovering at just under reporting thresholds, a draft beneficiary form never submitted but filled to the last line, and a credit application dated 3 days after the funeral with projected income that assumed immediate access to policy funds. The investigator logged red flags. The court set a compliance hearing. The DA's office requested copies with a politeness that never bodes well for the person receiving it. Night settled without ceremony. The rabbit rested where Lily could find it in her sleep. The codicil slept under plastic with its seal unbothered by argument. The house, which had been a witness all week, allowed itself to be a home for an hour. The refrigerator's small breath, the porch light taking bugs into its halo, the quiet clatter of pencils in a cup. I made tea I forgot to drink and stood at the window where the glass shows you the outside layered over your reflection. I looked steadier than I felt. I looked enough. The next morning would bring the add-on hearing, the codicil under a judge's lamp, and a calendar that aligned guardianship with the estate in a way strategy could not pry apart. The last argument left to Mark would be the only one that had ever wanted to work, a story about stability, told louder than the truth. Hannah's voice had already told the court what to measure. The rest would be math. The add-on calendar ran like a metronome, short matters, clean rulings. None of the heat that turns hearings into theater. Our exhibit cart returned to its place, the codicil under plastic, the blue wax seal photographed twice, the guardian nomination already anchored by the notary's journal. The judge read faster than anxiety could narrate, eyes moving over dates and commission numbers with the unromantic attention good benches give to verbs and signatures. Two files that had spent days pretending to be separate, guardianship and estate, were stitched into one proceeding with a sentence that tightened everything. Related matters consolidated in the interest of consistency and Lily's best interest. Orders descended like scaffolding. The no contest clause was recognized on its terms. Any attempt to reroute assets through beneficiary changes would trigger forfeiture to a reserve for Lily's needs. A freeze locked policy funds and estate accounts in place. Movements required a court's hand, not intention, with a portal login. A production deadline arrived with the gravity of a clock, complete bank statements, credit applications, and electronic access logs for 6 months prior to Hannah's death and all days since. The insurer's affidavit slid into the record without wobble, the device fingerprint and IP resting on the page like coordinates that don't negotiate. The interim custody gridline shifted as well. Joint temporary became temporary physical custody to me, school unchanged, medical continuity under my lead, supervised access for Mark pending review of home routines and financial motive. The report from the investigator had already mapped Lily's life in small proofs, medication cups placed where small hands can reach, pickup logs with my signatures in ordinary ink, a science project rubric taped to a fridge like a lighthouse for Wednesday nights. The court chose the path that preserved what a child recognizes when she wakes up. By lunch, process had done what love cannot do alone. And then the world outside the docket tried to turn itself into a stage. A local blog ran a soft focus piece about grief and guardians, a photo pulled from a public album where Mark's posture sold stability to strangers. The subhead pitched a question the case had already answered in paperwork, whether as step-parents. Continuity should trump a sibling's claim when a family is complicated. It was the kind of narrative that courts ignore and rumors confuse. Claire did not answer with adjectives. She answered with numbers. The clinic's certified non-record. The beneficiary portal login stamps 2 weeks before and 48 hours after. The rideshare breadcrumbs that took a trunk to an airport and back. The under-threshold transfers that aligned a little too neatly with Day's grief would have granted cover. The press release died under a ledger. Paperwork, when it grows a spine, makes better copy than spin. Afternoon folded into the part of process that feels like weather moving because you can't stop it. The bank's safe deposit affidavit entered the file with the codicil's resume attached. Witnesses listed in Charlotte Reeves' journal confirmed their Thursdays. The paralegal's email thread completed. Its arc from draft to we were scheduling. Signatures before the flu canceled her appointment. The court's orders gathered themselves into a single motion: preserve, verify, align guardianship with estate. And the room exhaled for the first time in a week without checking whether it was allowed. Evening made spaces inside the house that hadn't existed since the first envelope. Lily did spelling at the dining table, the pencil's soft scratch passing for peace. The rabbit button sat on the ledge like an object reclaimed from the job of carrying messages it was never designed for. The blue music box closed with the decisiveness of a chapter break. I walked the hallway and caught myself counting ordinary proofs. Shoes by the door in pairs that looked used. A lunchbox cleaned and drying. A calendar square with a dentist sticker that didn't need to be defended in court before sleep. An email from the clerk landed like a light left on. Status hearing accelerated. The court would consider making temporary custody extended pending completion of the financial review and any criminal referrals. The sentence did not celebrate. It set a line and placed our feet on it. The last thing I noticed before the house forgot to brace was a small detail process always leaves as a mercy. The way a seal, properly pressed, ghosts onto the next page. A faint ring where resolve went through. Morning would ask the court to make what we had last longer than a bridge. and somewhere on Mark's timeline. The hour between strategy and consequence was running out of minutes. Financial reviews don't care about intention. They count. The court-appointed examiner laid statements across a table until the months formed a map, and the map drew a line no caption could soften. The transfers were small by design, under thresholds that keep software from coughing, but they repeated with the loyalty of habit. Rounded amounts stepped out 2 days after paydays. Cash advances winked in and out like bait fish. Fee refunds appeared that only happen when someone dabbles in accounts they don't fully own. On 3 dates, a curious duet played. Beneficiary portal access in the afternoon, late-night applications for credit that assumed a windfall by morning. Math is a quiet witness, but it doesn't forget. The report arrived with pages that felt heavier than their paper. It used words that courts prefer: regularity, alignment, motive, anchored to hours and IP blocks, and the geometry of balances sinking where they shouldn't. The clinic's emptiness had been a hole. This was the shape around it. The judge read with the same practical patience that had been saving us since Part 4. Temporary custody stretched forward, not as mercy, but as maintenance. School unchanged. Bedtime a fact instead of a bargaining chip. Medical decisions under one steady hand with a calendar that had stopped apologizing for itself, that a referral slid outward from the bench like a tide. The DA's intake line turned our binder into a case file. The insurer's security affidavit became a kind of compass. The rideshare receipts that had spilled their timestamps became breadcrumbs a prosecutor knows how to follow. Process, which had seemed fragile in the first hours, now had shape and traction. It moved on its own legs. At home, the house received the news in a way only rooms can, a softening around the edges. A ceiling vent that didn't sound like a question. The kitchen clock ticking without sarcasm. Lily spread homework on the table with the whole body relief of a child who has been living in parentheses and finally makes it back to the main sentence. I wrote "New House Rules" on a card that wasn't for the court. Shoes by the door. Lunchbox emptied before cartoons. Button stays on the dresser unless the day misbehaves. Bedtime is a promise we keep to ourselves. She nodded in the way children do when rules feel like walls that keep rain off the bed. I walked the hall with the deliberate slowness of someone testing a bridge. The blue music box was closed and clean. The cedar chest held nothing it hadn't now offered. The rabbit looked like a toy again instead of a courier. I let myself believe, for a handful of breaths, that we had migrated from emergency to ordinary. Then the phone vibrated with a kind of pulse I had learned to respect. The examiner had found one more thread, an account titled with a benevolent nickname. Opened quietly during Hannah's final month, fed by those under-threshold transfers, and set to forward to an external wallet when conditions met. The condition field was blank. The last login timestamp was yesterday. Evening compressed around the house, like weather backing up against a front. Claire set an emergency hold in motion with the bank. The judge's clerk read a single sentence back that landed like a bolt in wood. The account froze while its name learned to be honest. The rabbit's stitched heart stared into the dim with an expression fixed at manufacture, and I felt the old urge to press play and ask Hannah to narrate the room. Instead, I opened a window to let the house trade air with the night. The status hearing in the morning would be short by design. Extensions, confirmations, a schedule that kept Lily's week from being rewritten by anyone with a password and a pitch. The DA's office had already scheduled interviews. The insurer queued a preservation packet that would take our quiet facts and make them louder than a blog post could bear. I set out the same suit, the same folder, the same pen that had learned to write only verbs and dates. The card with New House Rules stayed on the table, a small flag planted in defended ground. Near midnight, the neighborhood trimmed itself into silence. Tires hissed on distant asphalt. A fridge cycled. A nail above the hallway vent announced itself, and then remembered how to be still. I checked Lily once more and found her sleep heavy and complete, the way children sleep when grown-ups stop arguing with doors. In the living room, I turned off the lamp and watched my reflection recede from the window until the glass let the night back in. Morning would formalize what the last 2 days had made true. Custody would extend. Money would wait where it belonged. Paper would keep its spine. Somewhere beyond our walls, consequence was putting on its shoes. On my phone, the examiner's last note populated with the calm tone that had become our weather. One line, no drama, The account's recovery email matched an alias mark used for interviews and a side project that sold. Family finance hacks. The DA had requested a copy of the pitch deck. The house held its breath like a diver who knows the surface is close and wants to feel the exact moment lungs stop burning. I slept as if borrowed, knowing the morning intended to collect. Status hearings rarely make speeches. They make sentences that change rooms. The examiner's report lay where arithmetic likes to rest, flat, specific, indifferent to performance. The consolidation order had already stitched guardianship and estate together. Today the bench tied the knot. Temporary custody became physical and legal custody to me pending final judgment. School unchanged, medical decisions centralized, supervised contact for Mark conditioned on compliance and counseling. The freeze on policy funds and estate accounts stayed. Any movement now needed signatures that wore robes. The court acknowledged the Codicil's no contest clause and warned, without theatrics, that attempts to reroute money through beneficiary edits would trigger forfeiture to a reserve for Lily's needs. The insurer's affidavit about device fingerprints and IP hits entered the record like a set of coordinates you can't argue with. The rideshare timestamps and the under-threshold transfers filled the space where explanations go when they're asked to be interesting. The DA's office noted a formal investigation opened. Subpoenas had left desks, and paper was on its way to becoming testimony. None of it felt like victory. It felt like the house inside our lives getting its load-bearing walls back. By afternoon, we were home with copies that still smelled like warm toner. The blue music box sat closed on Hannah's dresser. The cedar chest looked smaller now that it didn't have to hide anything brave. Lily placed Button on the windowsill to watch the day finish. 8-year-old ritual restoring the kind of governance the court can't legislate. We wrote new house rules on a card big enough to read from the hallway. Shoes by the door. Lunchbox empties before cartoons. Bedtime is a promise. We don't keep secrets that make stomachs hurt. And anyone who loves you proves it with calendars, not passwords. Evening slid into place with the unremarkable grace I had been fighting toward for weeks. Homework at the table, a pencil tapping out a private rhythm. Pasta that didn't need to be apologized for. Inhaler check. The porch light catching moths in its small orbit. I printed a copy of Hannah's letter of intent and taped it inside the pantry door, not as a monument, but as a maintenance manual. We weren't going to need it to persuade anyone anymore. We might need it to remember that preparedness is love with paperwork. At bedtime. Lily asked if Button could say Mom's brave voice again. We pressed the stitched heart and let voice_02 fill the room with the geometry of intention. It didn't break either of us this time. It steadied us. When the file ended, Lily tucked the rabbit under her chin and said, to the ceiling, "We're keeping the rules." The ceiling didn't answer. Houses answer differently. They stop bracing, they hold. Later, alone in the quiet, I opened a new folder on the desk with a name I wanted to deserve. Hannah Carter Scholarship, Draft. The Codicil's reserve clause would become more than protection. It would become a promise to children who need ordinary saved from paperwork. The application would ask for nothing Hannah wouldn't have loved reading. Library cards. Homemade science. Proof of a lunch packed by someone who keeps lists on the fridge before sleep. I found one last envelope in the mail, forwarded from her HR, stamped weeks ago, installed in transit by the sort of bureaucracy that has never heard of plot. Inside, a note Hannah wrote to herself in the margin of a benefits form, a sentence so practical it felt like prayer. If plan changes, double-check guardianship. Custody and money must agree. Simple, unromantic, final. Outside, consequence began its slow work somewhere I didn't need to watch. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked like a metronome that had learned our new tempo. I turned off the lamp, checked the door. The navy paint caught the last light and kept it, and let the house be the size we paid for. Tomorrow would be school, and routes, and groceries, and emails that didn't carry hearings inside them. Tomorrow would not require a gavel to feel true. When I switched off the porch light, moths scattered, and the glass held only my reflection for a second. Tired, steady, enough. In the dark, Button's red LED blinked once as if to say we're recorded, then went still. Ordinary had returned. Not as a consolation prize. As the point. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, And turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story that we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.